Okay, good. I have a microphone, not because I have trouble being loud. We're also live streaming this for folks, alumni and folks across the world. So Happy New Year and welcome back to BU for those of you who are away for the summer. Welcome to BU for folks from the Global Development Policy Center Advisory Board who are alumni, who some of them haven't been here in quite a long time. And welcome back to faculty who are away for the summer and so forth. We're super excited. Please come on in. There's plenty of seats. Especially we kick out the deans here. Really, I see 4, 5, 6. So we're excited here at the GDP Center to start our third year. We're pretty new, and the GDP Center stands for the Global Development Policy Center. We're a university-wide research institute that is housed under the Vice President for Research, Gloria Waters, and the Pardee School for Global Studies. And our mission is really to bring faculty and students together from across the university to work on some of the world's most pressing development problems. We say that our mission that we practice is to conduct policy-oriented research on financial stability, human well-being, and environmental sustainability across the world. And we are inaugurated in our first year by the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, who charged us to not only be a university-based research institute, but also to be a do tank. Don't just be a think tank, he said, be a do tank. So we put just as much effort into the peer-reviewed research and rigorous research that we do to make sure that the work gets disseminated in a variety of different ways, whether it be interactive web pages on our web page, through data portals, through active engagement with health ministries, education ministries, and finance ministries, non-governmental organizations around the world. We're carrying the torch that he asked us to not only be a think tank and also be a do tank. So the center has 4 different research initiatives. We're going to showcase one of them today that we're particularly excited about. So I'm not going to talk about them because the people who know what they're talking about are going to talk about that one. I'll talk about the other 3. One of them is called the Land Use and Livelihoods Initiative. It's a group of folks from the Earth and Environment Institute, Earth and Environment Department, Public Health, and the Pardee School. And these are folks that look at local and global drivers of land use change, how it impacts climate, how it impacts soils and biodiversity in those countries, but more importantly, or just as important, it puts people and livelihoods at the center of the research and analysis that these folks do. Another one's called the Global Economic Governance Initiative. And if the Human Capital Initiative that you're going to hear the most about today really focuses on the ground, how might a woman's contraceptive choice have an impact on that community, on that woman's life, and on that country's development trajectory. The Global Economic Governance Initiative is flying up there at 30,000 feet and is examining the extent to which the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund or the Global Climate Agreement impacts development outcomes on the ground, whether it be environmental change, economic growth, or social and environmental impacts. A third one that we're happy that we just started in 2019 with a huge grant, a generous grant from the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, is called the Global China Initiative. Since China is an emerging power that now has a massive global economic presence, it's the largest trader in the world, and its development finance institutions, the China Development Bank, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and so forth, those institutions have larger development finance balance sheets than the World Bank and all of their equivalents combined. And so we're not looking at them alone and monolithically, but we're looking at them from a comparative perspective to examine the extent to which they impact financial stability, human well-being, and the environment. Before I talk about the one that I'm about to hand it over to, I want to tell folks how you can get involved with the Global Development Policy Center over the course of the year. One, we have events all the time. We have a seminar series that you folks are probably going to talk about called the Human Capital Seminar Series that are dealing with our human capital issues that we're working on. We have another one called the Global China Research Colloquium, and a number of other scattered talks throughout the semester. One of the interesting things that we're doing many interesting things this semester, but one big event that we'll have on October 18th is that we'll have Jin Lechun, the president of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, will come here. He's actually a BU grad, and it'll be really interesting to talk with him formally and informally. With the Economics Department and the Institute for Economic Development, last year we created a Paul Streeton Memorial Lectureship. Paul Streeton is one of the pioneers of development studies, and he was in the BU Economics Department for many years. He passed away in January at the age of 101, and a distinguished alumni established an annual lectureship in his honor. In March, we had the first one with Nobel Prize winner Joseph Stiglitz, who talked about the crisis in multilateralism and its impact on development. We're not going to tell you who this year's speaker is yet, but that's going to be next semester, and that'll be a big and exciting event in the next semester. So one, you can come to our events. If you're a faculty member, you can become an affiliate member of the center. Affiliate members are open to anybody who says or thinks or wants to do work on development. Affiliate faculty members, we can create a platform for you. We can publish working papers for you. You can use our space when other folks aren't using it. And you can nominate your students for something that we have called the Summer in the Field program. We pick a small group of students to go out in the field to work with professors, as some of them did this summer, on their research projects in the field, or they'll work with a non-governmental organization or a bank or some sort of development project that they might have found out on their own. So keep your eye out for notices about that. But you have to be nominated from somebody who's affiliated with the center. Other ways to get involved, I see there's a lot of students here. We have a lot of sponsored research going on related to the center. And all the professors, we have 23 professors engaged with the center, but we can't do all the work that we've signed up for. And we're really committed to experiential learning for students and plugging students into the work that we do. We actually have 6 job openings right now for graduate and undergraduate students. Where's Rebecca? Wave your hand. You can, if you're interested in some of those research assistantships, Rebecca can tell you about what you've got. We'll take your email and tell you how to apply for those. So one of our most exciting initiatives that we have here at the center is called the Human Capital Initiative, and this is a dynamic group of folks from the School of Public Health, from the Economics Department, from the Pardee School and the Questrom School of Business that are looking at interventions in health and education and labor market policies and what their impacts are on long-run development in low-income and lower-middle-income countries around the world. It's directed by Patricia Cortez from the Questrom School of Business and Mahesh Kara from the Pardee School, and I'm going to hand it over to them, and they're going to go a lot more in depth about what they're up to. So welcome everybody. These folks are going to give a presentation on what they're up to and some of the exciting things that they're working on. Then we'll have a little bit of Q&A between you and them, and then we're all going to get out of here at 5 o'clock. And go into the reception room and have a reception with cocktails, cupcakes, and so forth. And we really got to get everyone out of the room, because what we're going to do is, as we get out of the room, Buildings and Grounds is going to come in here and take away all of these chairs so we can have a party and everybody can fit in both sides. Okay, so I may be mean to you at 5 o'clock and say, Patricia, let's get out of here. But it's not because I don't like you. It's because I want to get a cupcake.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin.
Is this working? If anybody's uncomfortable or standing or gets hot at any point, we're also live streaming this in the other room. So you can feel free, like if you need to get up and walk or whatever, they're still in the other room.
Okay, so thank you all for coming. We're really, really excited to have you here to come and get to know our initiative better, especially on a Friday afternoon. I am Patricia Cortez. I'm at Questrom. I'm a labor economist. And my research areas are gender, immigration, and labor markets. So what I'm going to do here is just give you a very broad overview of what we do, in which areas that we focus, and what motivates us, why are we so passionate about our research. Okay, sorry. There it is. Is this working? Okay. Yeah. So what we are, as Kevin was saying, we are an interdisciplinary group of scholars coming from all over the university that have common research interests. It's human capital and development broadly defined. Sorry, this was not working. Okay, sorry. Okay, Where am I? No, am I here? Yes. So we focus on three main topics. The first one is power. There is women empowerment, and basically looks at gender inequities in many dimensions. We look at gender inequities in health, in education, in mobility, in labor markets. That are what I do. Political representation is what Rachel does. We also have population health economics. That's what Jacob is going to tell you about it. He works in HIV. He works in how individuals make health decisions. And finally, we have the political economy of human capital. That is mostly going to be Sam, who's going to tell you all about it. He looks at nation building, immigration, other topics. Now, we looked at very different questions, as you can see. We use very different methods. Some of us are in the field every summer. Some of us are rarely in the field. We work with secondary data or with historical data like Sam. But I think what makes our research united is that, and part of all the research in the center is this aim at having policy-relevant research that can be actually used to develop better policies and improve the world. We have research projects all around the world. We have Middle East, East Asia, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, all over the world. Okay. Now, why is this research important now? I don't think I have to sell the idea here of why we care about these questions. There have been great improvements, and I think all of you agree, especially in the last few decades, in human capital levels in the developing world, but we're still far from the developed world, right? So still millions of people in poverty. Health outcomes have improved, but they're still dire for some populations. Education is too. Most kids go now to primary school, but the quality of the primary schools might not be that great. Secondary school attainment is not as good. Access to tertiary education also is not great. We have higher burdens of diseases in some of the developing world. And finally, that is my research area, women in the labor market. And I particularly work in the Middle East, where women's participation is very low, particularly work in Saudi Arabia, when just about 16% of women are in the labor market. Why does that motivate me to work on this? On one hand, from a macro perspective, right, we're missing half of the talent of the population, right? The allocation of talent is not great. Women are as capable as men, and they have many qualities and talents that are being misused. And that has a cost in terms of productivity. That also has a cost on economic growth. On the other hand, it is really important for personal well-being. As a working woman, I know that work brings self-confidence. Work brings that I can make decisions on my children. Work means that I have more power in my household. Work means that I'm more politically involved, right? So all of these things, I think, is what bring us together here. This both view of, human capital is important for economic growth, but human capital is also important for individual people and families and communities. Now I'm going to give the microphone to Sam, who's going to tell you all about his... okay, you have one.
I have a microphone.
Okay,
yes, thanks. Okay, thanks very much, everyone, for coming. I guess Mahesh will come back to that.
Sorry.
Oh.
I forgot the last one. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I apologize. Yes.
I will hide.
Is that on? Yes. Sorry, I forgot about that. So how do we engage with human capital and development? So we have our working paper series. That's the research that we produce, but we also engage in many other ways. Here is a picture of, I believe, one of some students in the field in Indonesia, right? Some are in the field program. Here we have Jacob giving a conference in this very room. Here we have Mahesh interacting with policymakers or with government officials, and here we have again Mahesh with his grad students in India. So it's not just producing the research, producing the working papers, but then engaging, right, with policymakers, training students right, to do their own research and discussing and giving feedback on each other's research. Now, I think that's it. The next slide, I think, is science.
Maybe.
Maybe.
I don't need that.
Oh,
Yeah.
you don't need
Yeah. Okay, thanks everyone. So I'm a development economist. I'm in the Department of Economics. A lot of my work recently has focused around questions that sort of fall under this umbrella of what we think of as political economy. My research really falls into these three interrelated themes that are broadly aimed at trying to understand the sorts of incentives but also barriers that people face when trying to acquire human capital. And when I talk about human capital, I think very broadly. I think about things like how we make investments in different types of identity, feeling like we might belong more to the country we live in and sort of the national identity as opposed to our ethnic or religious identity. So just to sort of give a very broad sense of how I think about human capital. And so what I thought I'd do in this very short amount of time I have with you today is give you an example of studies that fall under each of these three themes. And all of my work, well, almost all of it, happens to be in the country of Indonesia, which, for those who don't know, the fourth most populous country in the world, one of its most ethnically diverse, and also a place where over the last 30 or 40 years, the government has taken a lot of steps, in some cases very dramatic ones, to experiment with policies and try and figure out what works for poverty reduction and sort of how to build institutions that might be capable of promoting human capital and development, which is, of course, why we're all here. So one of these projects looks at women like you see in the top of the screen here, who come from rural areas and go abroad for 2 to 3 years to work in a foreign labor market. Why do they do that? They can make enormous amounts of money relative to what they could back home. One of the important challenges that the government has been very keen to address in recent years has been to find ways to improve the experiences of these women while they're abroad, to make their migration safer, but also to increase the economic returns to some of that work. And so an important part of that experience happens to come from the agencies that are recruiting them in rural areas, that are placing them in jobs abroad, that are protecting them while they're abroad. And so what we're doing in this randomized experiment is trying to develop a tool, a market-based tool, that will allow women to choose better agencies. So how do we do that? Well, just like all of us, when we go on a trip to a foreign country or even a different city here in the US, we go to TripAdvisor and see how different hotels are rated based on the experiences of past customers. We're doing exactly that, but for migration agencies. And so we collected information from about 8,000 former migrants and constructed quality ratings that we then randomized across several hundred villages in Indonesia to try and understand how valuable that information would be in improving the lives of these women while they're working abroad. We don't have results yet. The data is now sitting on one of my students' computers back in the back of the room here, and if you come back in a year, I'll tell you what we find. So Indonesia happens to be one of the most ethnically diverse countries in the world, and one policy that the government explored in the 1970s and 80s was a program that resettled people from different parts of the country into newly formed communities, many of which were incredibly diverse and brought together people from very different ethnic backgrounds. And so in this study, what we try and do is ask the question of how diversity in one's community shapes incentives to invest in acquiring the national language as opposed to retaining one's native ethnic language as the vehicle for socializing your children and so on. And so just the sort of punchline is that in more polarized communities, by which I mean if I took this half of the room and called you one ethnic group and that half of the room and another ethnic group, you see very little integration between the two. On the other hand, if all of you were from a different ethnic group, that would be a context where we would see a lot of investment in the national identity. And a lot more integration through marriage, through other means. And so that's just one example of the sort of thing that I've been thinking about recently. Another way in which Indonesia has undergone particular challenges in recent years has to do with the role of religion in politics. So for those of you who followed recent elections, you noticed the Islamist organizations across the country played a very large role in shaping the political outcome and coalitions and so on. And what we do in this study is try and understand the sort of roots historically of the strength of these organizations and how they influence politics and public policy. Why does this matter for human capital? Well, there's an enormous religious schooling system across the country, and that, of course, has very important implications for labor market outcomes and policies that elected officials implement downstream from that. And so this is in this study we try and get a sense of sort of where the strength of these organizations come from and how they're shaping politics and policies that shape things like the education system. And then finally, just to give you a sense of what sorts of policies the government has been exploring in recent years to try and shape some of these incentives for conflict or cooperation across different groups. So Indonesia is very diverse, as I mentioned. Here's a map showing some of the broad ethnic groups across the country. And what the government did with decentralization at the end of the 1990s and the early 2000s was they started allowing districts across the country to redraw their boundaries and to form new local governments. And so what happened was, in a lot of contexts, you had very diverse districts, like the one you see here, basically splitting up into two. And now you've got a much more homogeneous district up here in red, and a relatively more homogeneous one down here before, whereas before they were pretty polarized with about half from one group and half from another. And so in contexts like this policy of redistricting led to a reduction in conflict and a reduction of violence and greater stability and promotion of public goods and development and so on. But in other contexts, that wasn't always so easy to find a way to draw that line to result in such a clean split. And in those contexts, you see greater conflict, less cooperation, and ultimately adverse public goods outcomes, lower development, and so on. And so this map here just shows you the sort of variation in the extent to which this policy of redistricting allowed for greater or lesser degrees of diversity in the new administrative units. So with that, I'll turn it over, but just say that I think thinking about the sort of political context in which individuals decide to make investments in human capital for themselves and their children is an important an important aspect of this broader agenda that we're working on.
Thanks very much, Sam. So human capital includes not just skills, but also people's health. And so the population health segment of our work asks questions around how can policy improve health?
Interactions between policy and human behavior to improve health.
There's sort of three focus areas that I'll do a similar thing to Sam and sort of highlight a few areas of my work. First is what I'll call population therapeutics. Second is decision-making about health, and the third is health and human capital, or interactions between health and education. A lot of my work has focused on HIV and TB in Sub-Saharan Africa, and so that is the context in which I'll give these examples. But in the work, we really try to emphasize the larger lessons from those specific examples to think about other issues of public health. So by population therapeutics, I mean how do we optimize therapeutics to serve populations? When we think about therapeutics or medical care or treatment, we often think about a clinical encounter between a doctor and a patient. And we're rarely thinking about how do we actually leverage that to achieve population health impact. 50 years ago, we didn't have the tools to even do that. And so we're really in a new, and I should say public health, the traditional means of improving public health are things like vaccinations, things like sanitary interventions. And so the idea of mass treatment is a relatively new thing. This figure here shows what happened in South Africa to life expectancy when they rolled out antiretroviral therapy for HIV. So this is treatment that has changed HIV from being a death sentence to a manageable chronic disease. And life expectancy increased by 13 years. Now it's about 18 years in the part of South Africa where I've done a lot of my work. Down here you see this didn't happen by chance, but happened because there was a large social movement that arose and demanded this of the government. When you have these big treatment-focused policy interventions, they require national big data systems. And there's sort of an opportunity that you get in countries with, like this is South Africa, where you have a more centralized health system than you do in a country like the United States, where care is very fragmented. And so one of those opportunities is that you have national data systems, and you also have you also have treatment guidelines that get followed. So rather than depending on each doctor to make the best decision with each patient, there's really a focus on how do we at the population level change guidelines so that they maximize health at the population level. And so in some of our work, we've partnered with South Africa's National Health Laboratory Service to construct a national HIV cohort, really a national cohort for HIV, TB, and we're expanding this to diabetes based on routine laboratory data, which is the first of its kind. And we're actively working with the National Lab Service in South Africa to integrate this into their data systems so it can be used to improve patient care there. We're also using this to optimize treatment algorithms. This was a case where all of a sudden, in April 2013, all patients starting HIV treatment started 1 pill instead of 3 pills. You wouldn't think that this matters, but actually the inconveniences of these more complex regimens turn people off of treatment, and adherence is lower, and that's what we found. And the second sort of focus area is to think about less at the policy and systems level, but about health decision making. And in the setting of chronic disease management, the critical health behaviors are around adherence, screening, adherence, and retention. In the case of HIV treatment, there's an additional wrinkle, which is that treatment is one of the best sources of prevention that there is. And this is led to a new era sort of in HIV treatment policy, but is also part of the way that we deal with malaria and part of the way that we deal with tuberculosis is that we try to expand treatment as a tool of prevention. And so this result here shows from a randomized trial, which shows that immediate ART, antiretroviral therapy, dramatically reduces onward transmission relative to delayed someone who's not on treatment. And so this has led to calls to really get this message out there that if you're on treatment, then you can't transmit. And yet when we ask young adults in rural South Africa what they perceive the risk to be of transmission when someone's on treatment, they just had no idea. And so here's an opportunity where you might be able to motivate people, potentially based on altruistic interests in their partner's health, potentially based on reducing sort of stigmatizing beliefs about transmission in the community. And so in ongoing work, we're planning a community RCT to provide this information on the community level and try to increase treatment uptake and adherence. The third topic is sort of how does, this is shifting from HIV treatment to treatment as prevention to prevention, which is what are the other policy spheres that matter for health, and education is a key one. And so in some prior work, we showed that a secondary school reform that extended expanded access to secondary school in Botswana, substantially improved attendance of basically increased access to grade 10, substantially increased educational attainment, and actually reduced HIV infection rates in the affected cohorts. And an ongoing work that we've just received NIH funding for, we're looking at impacts on childbearing and marriage and various HIV risk factors, as well as labor force participation. So looking at sort of this intersection between health, sexual health, decision-making, and education. So I'll leave it there.
Great. Hi. So I'm Rachel Brule, and I'm just joining the GDP Center and the Pardee School of Global Studies. And so this is a really exciting time for me also to be launching 3 new projects. One that I've worked on for many years before this is a book that's forthcoming with Cambridge University Press on women's representation and resistance that looks at how these mandatory increases in women's descriptive representation as heads of local government actually enable women to claim fundamental new rights to property, and how, in some cases, that makes things much better for women and their families and future generations. In other cases, it leads to extreme backlash, which in the worst cases mean that there's increased female infanticide and fewer female children born in the future. So this is all building off of that initial work that says female representation is something really powerful, and it can lead to very good things for women and their family, or very bad things, depending on the bargaining power women have at the time that they receive this representation. So what I'm doing now are 3 sets of projects in 3 new countries. The first is about how we actually translate representation into real power, into real influence. The second is about how climate shocks can actually fundamentally change the way that women engage the state in Bangladesh and demand gendered redistribution, particularly in economic terms, but not only. And the final is about empowering women in local government, and this is in Nepal, thinking about how we can increase the agency women have that they bring into their negotiations with the state on behalf of themselves and their communities. Okay, so I'll take you briefly. I'll try to be brief each one, and they're new. So there isn't a lot of data to present, but there's a lot of potential, I would say, at this point. So the first is actually 2 projects, one that's ongoing and one that's in pilot. And so this basically asks, when can groups facing multiple forms of discrimination harness descriptive representation to change outcomes of how the state treats its citizens? And so in the majority of states in the world, we see single-dimensional quotas, particularly for women. But there are very few cases where we see quotas for minorities within minorities, and it's hard to know if one-dimensional representation actually benefits people who are disadvantaged on more than just one dimension. And so I'm approaching this in 2 ways. The first is just to look at the best data that we have right now and leverage 2 sets of overlapping quotas in India and look at whether one-dimensional or 2-dimensional representation actually improves benefits for the least well-off. For, in this case, I'm looking at women who are members of the lowest castes in India, scheduled castes. And here, I'm also looking at one particular instrument which could make a difference, which is political mobilization. So there's a lot of work out there that says when you have mobilization, that might be a necessary first step, both to crystallize interests and actually to advance them effectively in the political arena. And here you can see a little bit of data, and basically what it tells you is that there are very significant differences in the preferences that women and men have from upper and lower castes in terms of what they want the state to do for them and why they vote to begin with. And what I find here in this initial working paper is that we do see that quotas make a difference for these most disadvantaged groups. So specifically, single-dimensional quotas for women alone actually do improve scheduled caste women's ability to make demands on the state. But they don't do much in terms of the social dimensions of representation. They don't reduce these enduring forms of polarization and access to state goods and in private life. quotas for scheduled castes alone, which are traditionally occupied by men, actually in some cases make things worse for scheduled caste women. The one case in which they make things better is where you see mobilization at the national level of scheduled castes. And there, it seems like disadvantaged women do see some benefit in terms of accessing the state. But the place where we see the benefits that kind of transcend both of these material and immaterial or social domains is where we have double quotas for women who are members of scheduled castes. And so that does suggest that, that quotas can make a difference, but one quota isn't necessarily enough. So the second project that I'm looking at is both an experimental and a survey, a behavioral and a survey experiment, which is piloting right now in one state of India, in Maharashtra, where basically we look at intra-elite bargaining between these disadvantaged groups who have been elected to head the local government and other elites in the community, both from the bureaucracy and from the polity. And what we'll be doing is running a series of experiments where we train groups in negotiation and where we change the structure of deliberation and see if any of these things can kind of reduce the likelihood that members of these doubly disadvantaged groups will be captured and will be unable to express their preferences and bargain to change the way the state treats its disadvantaged citizens. So that's one set of projects. A second is now moving into the environment. And so here I'm looking at Bangladesh, where we know that in the past decade, we've seen about 0.7 million Bangladeshis displaced each year due to climate change. And the estimates are that by 2050, we'll see 13.5 million Bangladeshis displaced due to climate change. And this is right now the #1 driver of internal migration. So there's a mass exodus of particularly men from rural Bangladesh, from rural agriculture, which is no longer quite as stable a form of income, into urban cities looking for new jobs. And this, to me, is a really interesting parallel to something that we know has made a big difference in how the state operates in the past, which is mass mobilization for war. So we know that where we've seen mobilization that requires the poorest men to put their lives on the line for the state, that suddenly, post-conflict, there's a much greater taste for progressive taxation and redistribution of income. We haven't looked at what happens to women who are affected by this mass migration of men. But my expectation is that we'll see women engaging very differently with the state and willing to demand much more in terms of gender parity when it comes to the economic opportunities they have access to, particularly thinking about regulation and opportunities in the textile industry. And so what I'm doing there is to start a small-scale survey of 3,000 women working in agriculture in the most drought-affected of Bangladesh's districts in Rajshahi, partnering with the International Center for Climate Change and Development. And there, I'm going to take advantage of intra-district variation, both in exposure to climate change, here drought, and in the nature of gendered norms, so how progressive they are based on how likely it is that people are to use the plow, so whether or not they're cultivating wheat or rice. And so this is a pretty path-breaking work, looking at what sorts of changes and demands women make on the state. And that'll be, in part, exploiting survey experiments, and down the line, there might be RCTs that happen out of this, too. Okay, and the final project, which is the earliest, so I have the least data for, is an RCT in Nepal, where we've seen a massive shift in representation. So as of 2017, there was decentralization with mandatory quotas for women in local government, where at the ward level, either the mayor or the deputy mayor position has to be occupied by a woman. So we now see 40% of local government being run by women. And so what I'm doing with two partners here is at the moment in the proposal stage, but this is an RCT where essentially we're going to be training local female constituents in how to negotiate effectively with the state. And in half of the cases, that will be women randomly selected from communities. In the other half, they'll be invited to bring a friend, so there'll be some kinds of social networks that they can take advantage of. And in half of the cases, they'll be exposed to a female representative, the other half to men. And what we want to see is, at the moment, only 12% of women participate in politics at the local level in Nepal. This is a great opportunity for women to actually make a difference in how the state works, and we want to see if we can help make that happen. So that's it. Thanks.
Great. So what I would like to talk about is actually less about the research. A lot of excellent research that is ongoing, that has been completed, and also that is being prospected right now from the initiative. And what I'd like to talk about is how can students and faculty and other folks around the university, but also beyond, how can they get involved with HCI? And I'll start with the students because I find that students are the most interested and the most eager to get involved with the initiative because there are lots of opportunities for students here. Particularly in the course of research, as students transition from undergrad going into their master's and PhD programs, the interesting thing about HCI is that we've had students across all of these spectrums. So HCI has not just been an initiative that has taken in, for example, graduate students. Undergrads, I mean, in my projects, most of the students who have had going to India, for example, my India projects have been undergrads. And what's awesome about HCI is that there are lots of opportunities that are sponsored through the initiative, but also sponsored through each of our individual projects and research that students can take advantage of, and where students can directly work with HCI faculty and HCI research staff. I'm going to talk about my experiences with students and how students have had experiences with me in the field, and we actually have a few students, Mary back there and Amelia down here, have actually gone, they're the most recent cohort of students who have gone with me. Amelia went to Malawi with me this past summer, and Mary was in India with me in the summer. And I think that I would highly encourage anybody to talk to both of them because I'm going to sell this as an excellent experience, and they may have very different stories of how difficult the field was. And the field was difficult, I'm not going to lie. But I think that there was a lot of valuable insight and experience gained from them. So I've had students go to India on my projects for 2 years now, and in the first year I had 3 students, 2 undergrads and a master's, and this past year I had 6. I had 4 undergrads and 2 master's students go to India with me, and then in Malawi I had a PhD student and 2 master's students. So, and all from different departments and from different backgrounds, actually going and experiencing what research is like in the field. So students, in order to participate in research, there's a lot of training and a lot of experiential learning that students are given to be part of this research experience. For example, all of my students have to be trained in human subjects research because, like many of us here who work in the field and who do field research, we work with human subjects. So learning about the ethical considerations that need to go into protecting confidentiality, data privacy, all of those structures that have to be in place before the first data point can even be collected, students have to be trained in them. So before Amelia and Leah were even part of my research teams, they had to be trained. And then following that, I think that they can speak for themselves when you ask them about how much work went into the preparation stage of that students had to go through in order to, for example, design and develop protocols, study protocols going into the field, developing survey instruments and monitoring tools, being able to train field teams on the ground. So Amelia trained, I think we had 5 enumerators who we trained in Malawi. We had about 12 enumerators we trained locally in India, and that was hands-on, right from the ground up, designing the instruments, being able to train, monitor, and evaluate performance on the ground. Learning how to actually work with supervision of field teams, project management, data management. I would think these are all skills that one wouldn't necessarily think is inherent in a student research assistant position, because typically it's not just about the data. The data is it's literally the last thing that we get. But there's so much that goes into it beforehand that I think that we as researchers would like to impart to students when it comes to the experiential learning of research. Like, our data sets are like literally the last thing that we see. But I mean, as Sam would say, and I think you just have this data that's being sitting, that you're going to be evaluating for a year, but like, I don't know how many years of data and how many years of preparation it took for you to do this. 6 years of preparation for you to even get the data in the state that it is in terms of analysis. Most of the field studies, like I just finished a field study that took 3 years, and I've just been able to start looking at data. So learning, like having students experience this along with faculty and along with researchers is, I think, a very important like set of experiences that could be imparted. Particularly students want to go on and do their own work. What's really also exciting is that faculty are more than willing, more than happy to support and mentor students throughout the entire research process. And the way that, the deal that I make with my students, for example, is that they learn all these methods, they learn the protocols, they go to the field, they work in the field, they collect the data, and as a result, the data is part theirs. They own the data as well. So Amelia and Leah, Iyab, who's not here yet, and Mary, they will be using the data that they have collected for their own master's theses, for their own publications, so that they can actually get peer-reviewed publications by the end. Because the goal is not just to write a master's thesis or an undergraduate honors thesis and have it sit on a shelf somewhere where nobody else will read it. It's actually to produce peer-reviewed research that is actually disseminated for larger consumption. So that is the goal that we're facing right now. We have another year to write 2 papers, and we will talk about the papers in a bit. Yeah. So this is where I have been working for the past. I've been working in Malawi for the past 4 years or 5 years, but we also have a field site in India, and there are 2 different projects that are ongoing. Professor Gallagher, Kevin had actually mentioned that one of the projects that we were working on that Amelia was part of is a project in contraceptive decision making. How do women make choices based on the counseling and the information that they're given in terms of their contraceptive and fertility decisions and preferences. So that's a project that we're currently working on with 700 women. We just finished the baseline data 2 days ago, and we are starting the counseling intervention on Monday. We're very excited because we just got that team going. In India, we've been working there for about a year and a half now, where the project there is very much like what I think what Rachel was mentioning, which has to do with social networks. And there what we did is that we know that in India, 85% of women in India cannot travel alone. Even if they have access to services, even if they have access to markets, even if they have access to clinics, they must be accompanied by someone, particularly in the region where we work. So because of this limited social mobility, one of the interventions that we were thinking about is that if women wanted access to clinics, why not enable or find a way of empowering them to use their friends or use their peer networks to support them? So essentially what we're doing is we're running an intervention that's very much like Groupon, where women are given a voucher, and if they have a friend who they want to bring with them to the clinic, the friend can also get the voucher and the same discount with them. So we had the baseline that we did in 2018, and Mary was part of the follow-up where we had waited for a year. They were given this intervention for a year, and now we're following up with them. So these are the 2 projects which students were directly involved in, and I will say that apart from supervision from PIs, and the India study has 3 other PIs, not just from BU. So there's Catalina Herrera from Northeastern, who's the main PI. We've got Anukriti from Boston College, and Praveen Pathak from the Delhi School of Economics. So this is a multi-university study that has been going on for about a year now. And what's amazing is that while the PIs have always been on the ground and that's overseeing student activity, the entire project, from data collection to survey development to end-line monitoring, has all been student-led. So that in itself is quite an achievement. So this is how students are actually involved. So this is me doing a field training last year in 2018 to our team of enumerators with tablets. Anamika and Prachi is not here yet, but she's an undergrad. She was a junior. She was a sophomore when she started. So it's not that we only just take undergrads who are finishing in their junior or senior years. We've had, like Prachi was actually the youngest who went into the field from her very first year, and she's been involved in the project ever since. One cannot tell this, but it's actually about 115 degrees in this room when we're training, so it's extremely hot. Over there, you may see that maybe I'm happy, maybe I'm not sure, but I'm actually getting an anemia test done there because we also did blood data collection and we also did anthropometrics. So that's our enumerators and our team actually doing data collection for, because we do data collection for maternal and child anthropometrics. So maternal height, weight, and anemia, which are indicators and biomarkers for health and well-being. This is our training from this year, where we have our team of enumerators, and those are two of our enumerators from Malawi who are doing some practice testing. So when it comes to students and actually thinking about how can students get involved, and students always ask, or always seem to be thinking, how can they get involved? The simplest way to get involved is to ask. It's not actually, I think that the way that both of you found out about this, and that both of you were interested, was literally you had me in class, you came up and I was talking about some random intervention or some disaster in the field that I was experiencing, and then you came up and you said, how can I be involved as part of this circus, right? How can I be involved in this project? And that's how it was. And so it's not, I mean, there's so many opportunities to find out about HCI and all of the projects that we are involved in, and it's not until students actually come up and approach faculty, approach Rebecca, approach Kevin, approach any of the other HCI support staff here on what's going on, that students can really avail themselves of these opportunities. We have established now, as Kevin had mentioned, a monthly HCI seminar series. This is particularly for doctoral students who can present works in progress as well as completed works, because especially for doctoral students who are finishing their degree and who are going to start coming up on the market, this is a great opportunity to receive feedback and comments before they actually start presenting and going on the market. Definitely there are, HCI also is in collaboration with a lot of other initiatives throughout the entire university. Being a university, being an initiative that is part of a university-wide center, we have a lot of connections, especially with the IED, especially with all sorts of other institutions and initiatives all across the university. So the way that students, faculty, and staff can definitely be involved is to also get involved with other institutions with whom we work in tandem. And we also have another series, the Research Seminar Series at the Party School, where faculty present, but I know that the Party Graduate Council and several other student-related and student-led initiatives also have their own research seminar series where students can also learn about what other students are doing. Because honestly, students are doing amazing things, and it's important for students to learn. It's the best way for students to learn, typically, is from each other.
Is there research on tap October 29th?
Right, yes. So on October 29th, right? Yes, October 29th, we have what is known as the Research on Taps event, which is a rapid event. It's usually how long is it per presentation?
4 minutes.
4 minutes with 2 slides. And this is going to be with researchers who essentially are coming from all over BU, all not just from HCI, not just from the GDP Center, but from all over, who focus on human capital global development. And they'll be presenting their research. It's like one of those like speed chats, or speed dating type of events, where you get to learn about what are all the different things that other researchers from across the university are doing. And it's not just a good way for students to learn, but also for faculty to learn about what other faculty are doing, because there's so many things that are happening at BU that sometimes you just get overwhelmed. But it's a good place for an essential location for us to learn about each other. So I will leave it there.
To find out about all these different things, we have a little iPad out there, and we don't know how you figured out how to get here. We're glad that you did, but make sure that you put your email address and stuff like that so you can find out about all these different events. So we've got a good 20, 25 minutes or so to interact with all these folks, asking questions about their research, about their findings, and so forth. And then we'll go out there and have a reception. Everyone will jump on you to try to find out how to get on all these projects as they're stuffing cupcakes down their mouth. But today's our open house. Our idea is to continue developing a community across Boston University on development issues. So when you raise your hand to ask a question, please tell us who you are and where you're coming from across the university, if you're an alumni or something like that, so we can all start to get to know each other a little bit. And our tradition here at the center is that first question is always from a student. And the tradition is also, if the student doesn't raise their hand, then I just pick somebody. But luckily, I don't have to be mean. Do I have to hand these around? Is that right?
Right here?
Yeah. Here, why don't you folks take this one?
Yeah, we can just pass that around.
Here you go.
Thank you very much. Is this working? Can everyone hear me? Okay. My name is Ahmed. I'm a master's student at the Party School. I just wanted to ask, since Professor Kevin mentioned earlier, we're trying to become more of a do tank, and this is for all the professors out there. So you get your data, and we get everything. What's next? How do we start working on all of this? Who do you approach to implement all the necessary policies? I know this is a very general question, but like obviously we get all that, and we the students work on it, but the policies have to go through upper, like in governments. Are we able, does the faculty are able to do any of the things like that to actually cause the change that's necessary? Thank you very much.
More comments, questions? Come on, don't be shy. Here we go. Introduce yourself.
Is it on?
Yeah, it doesn't amplify.
Okay. I'm Michelle. I graduated from Sargent in 2012, and I went on to get my doctoral degree in physical therapy in New York City, where I'm from. I have had an interest for a long time, once my loans are paid off and such, in joining Doctors Without Borders, but this interests me a lot, and this is something, again, this wasn't here when I was in school, so I'm very interested to see if any of you work with physical therapists or teams like that.
One more, then we'll hand it to them. Oh.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Leo, a graduate of what used to be the Department of IR back in 2011, now the Party School, of course. And thanks for the presentation, by the way. My question is, a lot of the data that's being gathered, and in relation to being the do tank, so to speak, does this information purposely get passed on to other advocacy groups, NGOs, government organizations, local governments, Congress, for example? What is kind of the maybe ambition might not be the right word, but like what's the plan and sort of the vision for this amazing information that all of you are getting right now?
So the first and third questions were about how do we do and sort of dissemination. And I won't speak to physical therapy, but maybe somebody else can. I'm sure others have other perspectives from their work. I think that there are a few ways that the do comes into my work. And so part of it is where there's an opportunity for direct, almost service delivery or technical assistance. We take those, in part because it's impact, and in part because it builds collaborations. And so the example with the National Laboratory Cohort, where we've been working very closely with them to enhance their own data systems, now that's something that they can go and run with, and it sort of has a multiplying effect on what they're able to do. So that's sort of almost a service delivery technical assistance aspect. A second is sort of very local, which is not just dissemination to local, say, policymakers, but to communities themselves. So one of the projects I've been working on says, okay, we've done this research showing these big increases in life expectancy. Do people know that? Or we've done this, there's all this information on treatment as prevention. Do people know that? Should we provide this information to people? What's the responsibility to do that, and how do you do that most effectively so that people have the benefits of the information that we all have the benefits of? And so that's almost a dissemination as research sort of perspective. And then third is kind of really engaging with with policymakers at every level, and some of that is presenting at meetings. Some of that is engaging policymakers in defining study questions and thinking about what and even co-authoring papers with policymakers in some cases. So for me, it's kind of run the gamut of some of those things.
I'll just say one more thing, which is of a project I didn't present that's under revision right now and under consideration in the Journal of Politics. But there, it was work that we did in Northeast India in a fairly remote tribal community in the capital of Meghalaya in Shillong. And all of the research for that project, which was trying to understand gendered gaps in political participation and preferences about redistribution, that was all run by enumerators or surveyors who had master's degrees from Shillong itself. And that project only worked because all of the enumerators wanted it to happen and felt that there was some benefit for them personally to learn this information. And so the commitment that my co-author and I made to them was that as soon as we actually have the paper being widely disseminated, we'll give all of the information back to them, and we're going to be holding a conference in the capital of the state in Shillong, hosted by a local organization, bringing together policymakers from the locality as well as from across India, and scholars as well from across the region and hopefully beyond, to have them present the findings from the results and say where they want it to go policy-wise. So that's one.
Yeah, sometimes the do also comes like the other way around. They looked for you. The project that I'm working in Saudi Arabia is a collaboration between the Kennedy School and the Ministry of Labor of Saudi Arabia, who has an interest in creating a more productive economy. And they wanted some research experts in how to increase female labor force participation and figure out what the barriers are for it. So it came from them, and then it was our responsibility to collaborate with them.
Yeah, I think that like the general consensus amongst us, and also one of the considerations that we take, is that the dissemination effort is not independent of the research. Like, our dissemination efforts are ingrained in the actual research process from the start. Just as an example from our projects, and actually, I don't know if maybe we've gone too far, but for example, these are all policy engagement opportunities that we took in India recently, where this was in 2018 when we were starting the project. The gentleman in the center is actually the district magistrate of the district where we actually were conducting the field study. And so prior to even starting any sort of on-site research, we met with local communities, we met with the local leaders, the local stakeholders, and we introduced the problem that we were identifying, and we're actually collaborating with them throughout the entire process to say, is this even a problem? Like, we as researchers may have priors to say, oh, this is what the data tells us, but locally that actually may not be, that may be a non-issue for all sorts of reasons which are unknown to us until we actually go there. So this gentleman was actually very supportive of our effort and of our interest in actually collecting data, but also thinking about how that data can be translated back to local communities, which is actually what we did here in the second picture, which was actually taken just a couple months ago in 2019, where all of these are the ASHA workers. These are the local health workers and who provide services to local communities there. And this was actually organized overnight, where we were just saying, you know, we're back in the communities. We have started collecting our data again when we're ready to do an evaluation and start to talk about dissemination and what the implications of our results may mean for local communities. And overnight, we had about 200 ASHA workers just organize and actually come in and say, we want to learn more. Like, so we know that this has been happening. We know that we have women and communities who have been impacted by the research and who you've been interviewing over a year. Tell us what's going on. And then we had an open session, and that's just like one way in which, like, throughout the entire process, we have been involved. The same thing has happened in Malawi, where, for example, the intervention itself was designed and there was tons of input and feedback from the Ministry of Health and the Reproductive Health Directorate, who have very big stakes and who have very important claims to understanding what some of the barriers are to women when it comes to accessing maternal and child health care. So they're involved from the very beginning. And I think that's also the case for most of our research, where it's not just coming in from, like, it's not just a research and run type of initiative, which is something that all of us want to avoid. where we come in, we do something, and then we just take the data and run. That's not how research can be reinforced to actually improve policy. Yeah. So.
I'm happy to tell you more about similar things in Indonesia, but I'll spare you that. I will come back to the question about physical therapy. Right now, in the field of development economics, there's a big movement to bring in insights from psychology, social psychology, other dimensions of psychology, and also from health sciences as well. And so, as part of that, it's not physical therapy at least that I'm aware of, but there is a lot of work on cognitive behavioral therapy. There's new research trying to understand how pain, how things like lack of sleep, lots of things that are studied at length here in rich countries where we have access to healthcare and so on, how those sorts of things might have very different implications in a context like a low-income country where you have much more limited access to these sorts of things. None of us have expertise in that area, but there is, I'm happy to point you in the direction of people that are working on these sorts of things, and happy to talk after.
I should just say, generally across the center, one of our on this question about dissemination and the policy engagement and being a do tank, we really do see it as one of the 5 pillars of our strategic plan. One of our mottos is research, regurgitate, and recycle. Not everyone can read a histogram. Not everyone reads the Journal of Epidemiology or the Journal of Development Economics. Policymakers that we work with. And so we're often regurgitating it in a short policy brief or an op-ed at an opportune time when that particular issue rises to the policy discourse, or one-on-one small workshop engagement with health ministries or finance ministries, depending upon the different work that we're doing. One of the things that one of our groups did was pull together civil society organizations from Latin America and from China, who were both looking at Chinese development finance in the Andean Amazon. Both of them were looking at it from 2 different vantage points and researching it and doing advocacy, some of them in China and Beijing, focusing on these institutions, and some of them in the Andean Amazon. We brought them together and presented some of our work with them and orchestrated some dialogues. I think you'll meet during the reception a gentleman named Joshua Pitts, who's I think in the other room. One of the other things we have a focus on what we call data. Data for analysis, transparency, and accountability. So whenever we can, we take the data that we're working on these different projects on, and we not only make it freely available on our webpage, but Josh will do interactives, so that a journalist or a civil society person can understand the sort of basic things that are going on there. So I would go to our webpage and check data. We are really happy that we are the first, not the only anymore, we're the first webpage at Boston University. The whole thing's in Chinese. And we also have a WeChat account. For those of you who have a WeChat account, you can get that. And we have a communications assistant, a student, who is constantly putting our stuff out there in Chinese, especially the work that's most related to China. But they even get the headlines of everything that goes on here. We have a dedicated staff person, Sarah Luttrell, who her whole job is to be our strategic outreach and communications person, because we understand that our bedrock, right, we're at a university, so we need to be in the Journal of Epidemiology, the Journal of Development Economics, the Journal of Politics. That's what gives us our credibility. That gives us something to talk about. Why else should we be engaging in these policy decisions? But we want to make sure that it doesn't get stuck here on the blackboard and stuck here in the libraries that nobody goes to anymore, that we really spend just as much time pushing it out there. I think we have time for one more round. Can we take questions from the other side? Are there a bunch of people over there? No? No, don't be. Well, folks, if someone wants to run over and bring some questions, if you can hear me through the microphone, we'll take a couple from over there. But if not, a couple more questions from in here, comments from in here. I shouldn't have said cupcakes and cocktails on a Friday. No one wants to stop. Any more comments, questions? Well, We really excited to start off a whole new year with all of you folks, and as you can see, this is an incredible initiative that we have here at the GDP Center that really draws on, it's just amazing. We've got 3 different disciplines from 4 different schools or departments clustering around the same set of issues. And if you come to our Research on Tap on October 29th, you'll meet, I think, 14 or 15 of them that are also working in and around these issues. So let's go out in the hallway here. Let's have some cupcakes and cocktails and a bite to eat and get to know each other more informally. If you want to talk to these folks informally, we can, but promise us that you put your name on our little iPad over there so you can find out about stuff like this that we're doing across campus all across the year. Thanks so much to the HCI team for this great presentation, and thank all of you for coming.